Today we have a special story about a boy who goes on some special adventures because he is flat. His name is Flat Stanley, and our story is by Jeff Brown, and the pictures are by Scott Nash. I think some of you know this story about Flat Stanley. Well, I have a hat here that has some parts that are flat. And if you look at the top of it, you can see that it doesn't rise up. It's not higher in any part here than the other. So this part is the flat part. Then there's another part here. If I was to look around the sides, this also is a flat part because I can walk across it, straight across. And it's the same. You see, it's all the same, straight across. It doesn't go high and low. It stays the same level across. So there's my flat hat. And we have a song that goes with our story of Flat Stanley, and it's called Stanley's Flat. What do you think of that? I'm going to sing it for you so you can hear it. Maybe our dogs will join, I don't know. They're a little tired. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's smile, now it can stretch a mile. Stanley's flat, what do you think of that? Late one night I went to sleep, dreams were in my head, and I woke, they found a board had fallen on my bed. Here's Stanley's flat, Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's smile, now it can stretch a mile. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Fold me in an envelope, stamp it, and I'm done. I can travel around the world, being flat is fun. Stanley's flat, what do you think of that? Stanley's flat, what do you think of that? Stanley's smile, now it can stretch a mile. Stanley's flat, what do you think of that? And that was our Stanley's flat. Now it's time for our story. Now inside the cover, we have Meet Stanley Lamb Chop. After a bulletin board falls on him in the night, flattening him to half an inch thick, Stanley finds out that being flat can be fun. Do you think this is fiction or non-fiction? You think it's a made-up story or a true story? You're right, it's fiction. He really can't be flat and fly around the world. There's his bulletin board that falls on his bed. And the dedication is in memory of Jeff Brown and all that he inspired, and that's by Scott Nash, who illustrated the story of Flat Stanley. Hey, come and look! Arthur Lamb Chop called from the bedroom he shared with his brother Stanley. Mr. and Mrs. Lamb Chop cared greatly for politeness and correct speech. Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people, said Mrs. Lamb Chop. But look, said Arthur, pointing. Across Stanley's bed lay the enormous bulletin board. It had fallen on Stanley during the night. Mr. and Mrs. Lamb Chop hurried to lift it from the bed, but Stanley wasn't hurt. What's going on here? He said cheerfully, sitting up. Heavens, cried Mrs. Lamb Chop. Gosh, said Arthur, Stanley's flat. As a pancake, said Mr. Lamb Chop. The darndest thing I've ever seen. Mrs. Lamb Chop sighed and said, let's all have breakfast. Then we'll hear what Dr. Dan has to say. Stanley looks okay. He's just flat. In his office, Dr. Dan examines Stanley. "How do you feel?" he asked. "I felt sort of tickly after I got up," Stanley said, "but I feel fine now." "Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases," said Dr. Dan. The nurses took Stanley's measurements. He was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and half an inch thick. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's smile. Now we can stretch a mile. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Being flat could be fun. Stanley enjoyed going in and out of rooms by sliding through the crack at the bottom of the door. Arthur tried too, but he just banged his head. Being flat could be exciting. During the holidays, Stanley was invited to visit his friend Thomas in California. Mr. Lambchop brought home an enormous brown paper envelope and said, "Stanley, try this on for size." The envelope fit Stanley perfectly, and the next morning his parents slid him into it, along with an egg salad sandwich, and mailed him from the box on the corner. I wonder how that egg salad sandwich did on the trip. Stanley had a fine time in California. And there he is sunbathing, eating ice cream. He looks like he's on a ride, going on a ride somewhere. And then his friend is using him as a surfboard because he's flat. Thomas's family returned him in a beautiful white envelope they'd made themselves. They marked it airmail and wrote valuable and this end up on both sides. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's smile. Now we can stretch a mile. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? In the park, one Sunday afternoon, Stanley and Arthur watched some boys flying big kites. "Someday," Arthur said, "I would like to have a big kite." "You can fly me, Arthur," Stanley said. "Come on." He gave Arthur a spool of string and attached the string to himself. Then he ran across the grass to catch the wind. Up, up, up went Stanley. Arthur let out all of the string, and Stanley soared high above the trees. Everyone stood still and watched. That's pretty fun. Looks like a fun time to fly up in the sky like that. But Arthur got tired of running with the empty spool. Wedging it in the fork of a tree, he went off for a hot dog. He didn't notice when Stanley became tangled in the branches of the tree. Half an hour passed before Arthur heard Stanley's shouts and climbed up and set him free. Arthur apologized over and over again that evening, but Stanley was still cross. If he's cross, what does that mean? Yeah, he's mad. The next morning, Mr. Lambchop and Stanley met their neighbor, Mr. O.J. Dart, director of the famous Museum of Art. Mr. Dart looked worried. "Another valuable painting was stolen from the famous museum last night," he told Stanley and his father. "The police suspect a gang of thieves. They worked at night by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch." Stanley had an idea, and he explained it to Mr. Dart. "Excellent," said Mr. Dart. "We'll try out your plan tonight." That evening, in the main hall of the museum, Mr. Dart showed Stanley the most expensive painting in the world. Next to it was an empty picture frame. "And now, Stanley," said Mr. Dark, "it's time for your disguise." Stanley showed Mr. Dark the disguise he had brought. Let's see what that disguise was. Vinny, you want to hear the story? Come on. You want to hear the story? Come on, Vin. "That's a really good one. My cowboy hat. And a red bandana." "I'm sorry," Mr. Dark said, "but we don't have any cowboy pictures in here. You must wear the disguise that I have chosen." Stanley could hardly speak when he saw Mr. Dark's disguise. Uh-oh. Here's how another disguise is sort of like the one he had to wear. Something like this. It looks like a girl," he protested. But Stanley was a good sport, so he put on the disguise. Which one do you like better? I don't know. We'll see what the painting looks like. In the main hall, Stanley climbed into the empty picture frame and stood very still. "Very nice," said Mr. Dart, and went off to arrange the rest of their plan. Now Stanley was alone. The hall was very dark, but enough moonlight came through the windows for him to see the world's most expensive painting. Maybe the sneak thieves won't come tonight, he thought, and then a glow of yellow light shone suddenly through the center of the hall. A trap door had opened in the floor. The sneak thieves, carrying lanterns, came up into the hall. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's smile. Now we can stretch a mile. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? I hope they're going to catch them. The thieves took the world's most expensive painting off the wall. "This is it, Max," said the first thief, whose name was Luther. "In all the great city, there's no one to suspect us." Then Luther saw Stanley in his frame. "I thought sheep girls were supposed to smile, Max," he said. "This one looks scared." Stanley managed a tiny smile. "She's smiling, sort of," Max said. "And what a pretty little thing she is, too." Well, that made Stanley furious. In his loudest voice, he shouted, "Police! Mr. Dart! The sneak thieves are here!" "Max," Luther whispered, "I think that I heard the sheep girl yell." "Oh boy, yelling pictures, we both need a rest," Max whispered back. "You'll get a rest all right," shouted Mr. Dart, running in with lots of policemen. "You'll get arrested, that's what." The sneak thieves were quickly handcuffed and led away to jail. The next morning, Stanley Lambchop got a medal from the chief of police. The day after that, his picture was in all of the newspapers. For a while, Stanley was famous. People would point him out and whisper, "Over there, Agnes, Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the museum robbers," and like that. But then people began to make fun of him. "Hi, super skinny," they would call. That was not nice. They were bullying him. Late one night, Arthur woke to the sound of Stanley crying. "What's wrong?" he said. Stanley sighed. "I want to be like the other people. It's not fair." "You're brave," Arthur said. "You really are." And then Arthur had an idea. He turned on the light and ran into the big toy box in the corner. He tossed aside toy soldiers, airplanes, and boat models. "Got it," he said, holding up an old bicycle pump. What do you think, Nolan? Do you like this story? Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's smile. Now we can stretch a mile. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? "Okay," Stanley said after a moment, "but take it easy." He stood with the end of the hose in his mouth, clamping his lips tightly so no air could escape. Arthur began to pump. "If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hand," he said. Stanley's top half began to swell. Stanley got bigger and bigger. His pajama buttons burst right off. Pop, pop, pop. Soon he was all rounded except for his right foot. He shook his foot twice and it swelled to match the other one. There stood Stanley Lambchop, as if he had never been flat at all. "Thank you, Arthur," Stanley said. "Thank you very much." Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop came in to see what the boys were up to so late at night. "George," said Mrs. Lambchop, "Stanley's round again." "I'm the one who did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the brothers back into bed and turned out the light. "Good night," they said. "Good night," said Stanley and Arthur. Very soon, all the Lambchops were asleep. And that was Flat Stanley by Jeff Brown, with the pictures by Scott Nash. And let's hear our song one more time. Now Vinny's on. Try again. Because he thinks you're going to get him. No, I'm not. Come on, Vinny. Come on. No, I think we're screwed. Come on, Vinny. Come on. Let's see. Hold on. Good job, Vinny. Good job. Thank you. Thank you. All your fans out there. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's smile. Now we can stretch a mile. Stanley's flat. Had fallen on my bed. Here's Stanley's flat. Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's flat. What do you think of that? Stanley's smile. Now we can stretch a mile. Stanley's flat. Stamp it